Just something about me. I am heavily into social justice, or I used to be. I love social justice. But I guess privately, in the last few years, what some people call social justice, I call goofiness. Like, to me, it's not social justice. And I discovered this woman who I just adore, and her name is Loretta Ross. I mentioned her before, and she's had years working against the KKK, and now she's kind of a professor somewhere in New York, but everything she says and writes, I absolutely love. And she's this older black woman. She was in the civil rights movement, and she's just so incredibly wise. And luckily, she sees things the way I do. But she's so articulate. And she literally was on against the KKK on the front line. And she says things that a lot of young people today in the social justice movement, she says they're just angry and claim to be victims about everything, that everything's an offense. And she says this, she says, I don't understand this modern thing of white fragility, why white people should be ashamed of being white. And she says, if I'm not ashamed that I was born black, why should somebody else be ashamed? How does that improve the world? Just begrudging the rich or white or whatever, it doesn't create social justice. And for her, social justice is about love. That everybody's life is precious and should be loved. Social justice is about bringing hope in the world. And what I love about her is she laughs so much and she's so joyful. But if it's not bringing love and hope, don't call it social justice. Otherwise, it's just kvetching and revenge. And she tells a story that I think is amazing, where she tells a story in her younger days, when she was much younger. Her pastor used to tell her, because her job was to keep an eye on these hate groups, especially the KKK, what they're doing. And her pastor would say to her, when somebody wants to give up hate, you have to be there for them. And she would disagree with him. And her position was no, because she's known a lifetime of abuse and a lifetime of investigating horrible racial crimes. So if somebody from the KKK wants to leave, good for them, but she's not going to be there for them. And her pastor said, you've got to learn how to turn the other cheek. And she says, I'm tired of turning the other cheek. My cheeks are battered and bruised. She said, I love this line, Bruce. She says, I told him, I'm not auditioning for the role of Jesus. That's Jesus. That's not me. Anyhow, and years ago, she was, as I said, had to investigate all these hate groups. And one was the neo-Nazis that were here in Idaho, up in Hayden Lake. And there's a guy there, who considered himself a preacher, Butler. And one day, she gets a call from somebody from Butler's compound. And his name is Lloyd Cochran. And she immediately knows who Lloyd Cochran is, because for the neo-Nazis, he was their number one public relations recruiter. He would go around the nation recruiting, and he was really good. He had kind of this Bible-thumping way of promoting neo-Nazism, and he calls her, and he wants out of the neo-Nazis. A little bit more than that. He was actually kicked out. And his story was he was kicked out because his second son was born. And his second son was born with a cleft palate. And so the other neo-Nazis said that this child needs to be done away with, if you know what I mean. And he couldn't believe it. And they said, no, we believe in genetic purity, and he's not pure, so you have to do away with him. And what's kind of amazing is that he didn't know that neo-Nazis are not pro-life. And this absolutely shocked him. And he got kicked out of the compound because he kept his son. And that caused him to reassess everything in his life. And it was kind of this conversion moment. For him, it was this conversion moment. And he wanted to meet with Loretta Ross because what he wanted is now to go on an apology tour to all the cities that he went to recruiting for neo-Nazis. Now he wants to recruit for them to come on the side of love and life. And so Loretta and him go. And here's the weird part. Loretta and him become close friends. And she said, she described him as this, he was this like 5'6", very skinny, tightly wound guy. She said she never saw him eat. All he really seemed to ever do is drink tons of black coffee and smoke cigarettes. So he kind of reminds me of my staff. And she said, he's always tightly wound. And really, of touring around with him, she became friends with him. She became close friends with him. And his story was, in high school, he was bullied. He was picked on and bullied. But once he put on that swastika, people feared him. And then he could dress in camo and carry guns, and people really feared him. And finally, he was getting respect. And yeah, he went around preaching God, kinda. He could quote the Bible, but really it was just hate. And it was his second son that made him have this conversion to life. And so Loretta says she has this conversion. She was already religious, but she has this second conversion where she fell in love with this ex-neo-Nazi. And she starts to actually feel sorry for all the neo-Nazis and all the KKK. And then she says, I love this statement where she said, I actually felt sorry for him. I felt even love for the KKK. And if you can't hate the KKK, you can't hate anyone. She said, I like this. My worst enemy is really a difficult, a troublesome ally. There's nobody to hate. And so she said, in the end, the pastor was right. When somebody wants to leave hate, you need to be there for them. And she said, if you really believe in social justice, there's nobody left in the world that you can hate. And so I like how both of these people, Floyd Cochran and Loretta Ross, they have a second conversion. They thought they were religious, and they have a second conversion to love. And I mention that because that's the theme that's going on in the first reading in the gospel. And it's so obvious in the first reading because Jonah is a bigot. You have to understand that. Jonah is a huge bigot. And God calls Jonah to go to the Ninevites. And Jonah, no way. Jonah says, I worship Yahweh. Except you never really see him pray. At least in the first part. He says he believes in Yahweh, and Yahweh tells him to go to Nineveh, so he heads literally in the opposite direction. That's why he gets on the ship. He's going to go as far away as possible. Because the Ninevites, that's modern Iraq and Iran. And he wants them to die. They're the enemies of the Jews. He wants them dead. So no, he's not going to go. He heads the other direction. Hopefully you know the story. There's that big part about getting swallowed by a fish. And it's not a whale, it's a fish. And the point being, there's great symbolism. He'd rather die. He has these pagan sailors, throw him overboard. He would rather die than let one of these Ninevites live. Except he gets swallowed by a fish. And then he goes down to the bottom of the ocean. And the prayer, that's his first prayer. Now he's sunk down to the lowest place in his life. The lowest place literally on the face of the earth, the bottom of the ocean. And once he's literally hit the bottom of the world, then he prays to God. And 3 days in the belly of the fish, he's burped up on the shore, and God speaks to him. And it's this great passage where God says, I know the Ninevites. They're cruel, they're vicious, they're animals. I know you hate them. But Jonah, don't you understand? They're my children. I love them. Go. So after Jonah had hit rock bottom, he decides, yes, he will go and preach love to the Ninevites. He'll preach love, but he doesn't feel love. So everybody just knows the fish part. Now, for us Christians, just FYI, that's a big part, because the fish is Christ. You should know that by the early symbol of Christianity. Christ is the fish. Ichthus in Greek, it's another word for Christ. And in our baptisms, we get swallowed up by the fish. And the new shore that we step on is the resurrection, where we believe and preach love. So that's us. But Jonah goes and he preaches to the Ninevites. Once again, 3 days, which means a complete change. And the Ninevites listen. The Ninevites listen. And this is where the story gets interesting, because God decides to show mercy to the Ninevites. And that ticks Jonah off. He wants him dead. And Jonah gives a speech to God. He says, I knew you would do this. You're too forgiving. And God says back, Jonah, you believed in forgiveness when I showed it to you. When I gave you a second chance, you believed in it. But if I show mercy to somebody you hate, suddenly you don't believe in second chances. You don't believe in mercy if it's to other people. And it ends with this great line. The book of Jonah ends with this line where it's talking about God's mercy and forgiveness. And in Hebrew, it says, it was evil in Jonah's eyes. So it ends with this question mark. Will Jonah actually make this conversion to love? His first conversion is he'll preach love. Will Jonah make this second conversion to actually love other people? And it does end on a question, but I'd like to say he did, because why else would it be in the Bible? But it ends on this scary note. Will Jonah make this second conversion to actually love other people? So the reading is about, wow, not only you may say you believe in God and have a conversion, but then there's always a second and a third conversion, deeper and deeper into love. That's what happened to Loretta Ross, or the gospel. Notice Jesus starts to call disciples, and he starts with those who are religious. He's calling religious people to have a conversion. He's not going to the pagans. He's going to the religious people. He's not going to the sinners. He hasn't gone to the prostitutes and the tax collectors and the drug dealers and the golfers. He starts with the good people. And he calls religious people to have a deeper conversion, to leave everything. And so when it says repent means change the direction of your life. So he's calling them to this second conversion. He's calling us. And the idea is this. Religion is supposed to be this, not just a call to God, but many, many calls. Deeper and deeper and deeper conversions. If you're still the same person you were when you were 20, I feel sorry for you. Yeah, Loretta Ross, she was very religious in her 20s, but only in her 60s did she really learn how to love everybody. Religion is not one call. It's Christ always calling us week after week after week to a deeper and more profound love. So it's not a call, it's many calls. And if you think, well, religion is for those who believe in God, and it's those other people that need conversion. Congratulations, you're Jonah. Religion is for us people who want a deeper conversion. And so that line where he says he calls them and they drop their nets, that's great meaning. The net means what they're tangled up in. What nets do you have to drop or detangle yourself from to have a deeper conversion? So, it doesn't matter what it is. Anger, jealousy, whatever it is. You need to drop those to become the person you're meant to be. So when Christ says it is a time of fulfillment, what he means by this is he's calling you to fulfill what God created you to be, to fulfill what you were meant to be. That takes a lifetime of conversions and dropping of a lot of nets. Like I used to, I have to admit, when I first came to Holy Apostles, my number one sin was anger. Now that's dropped down to number 3. I'm pretty happy with that. Now my number one anger is worry, and it gets involved and interferes with my call to God. My second is being judgmental. And here's the thing. A couple years ago, I would have never said I was judgmental. It's only after my anger got turned down on the volume did I realize, wow, I am judgmental. I actually tried to keep a track of how many judgmental thoughts I had in 1 week. I have a lot. So you have to drop your nets to really fulfill God's plan to become exactly who God intended you to be. And the idea is that the more we become who we're called to fulfill to be, the more free other people are. The more I become what God has called me to be, other people's lives inch forward to a little bit more freedom as well. That's what it means to be fishers of men. So when Loretta Ross, suddenly when she's like in her 60s, where she just believes social justice is about love, loving everyone. She doesn't understand the younger generation that believes in shaming other people, because that's not love. That doesn't allow them to be who they're created to be. For us, we come to the altar of Christ week after week after week so that we can hear the call to drop our nets and become who God calls us to be. And so, together, let us stand and profess our faith.